Welcome to Strata. I'm Glenn.
And I'm Brandon. Welcome to the Minds on Muscle podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Minds on Muscle podcast. My name is Glenn.
And I'm Brandon, and we're really excited to have you. And as many of you know, this is the first time we're going live in the Fitness Pro Mentors Facebook group. So if you're watching this live, welcome. We're really excited to have you. We got a great topic lined up, but very quickly, as we're going through this today, we're going to be talking about some techniques around communication. And if any of you are interested in having a business consultation with either myself or Glenn about things you can do to improve your business right away and learn a little bit more about what we're doing here, we'd love to have you. But today we're talking about a really fun topic. Glenn, what are we talking about?
Communication strategies.
Ooh, communication strategies. So last week we got into part one, communication, and I feel like this was supposed to be one episode, but magically turned into two because we just realized that there's way too much to unpack here.
Yeah, I think the first episode we were almost on, we're very similar pages, but a little bit different. I think you thought we were going to talk about strategies, and I thought we were going to talk about big picture. And you let me lead the dance on that one. We ended up talking about big picture. And then you said to me after the show, you said, Glenn, why don't we talk a little bit more about strategies? Let's get a little bit more in depth. Give the people what they want. And I said, Brandon, I think that's a wonderful idea. So today we're talking about in-depthly actual techniques and strategies that we use to communicate with our clients and have the biggest impact on our business and their health as we can.
So the Coles notes from last episode, even though it's an amazing episode and we do recommend you listen to it, is communication is a very powerful pillar in your toolbox. And if you don't work on how you articulate sentences, taking these crazy advanced biomechanical concepts, but being able to break it down to whoever the learner is in front of you, whoever your audience is, you're going to have a tough time. So being able to make sure that your messaging lines up to whomever is in front of you, whether they're more academic or there's someone that doesn't have a clue about what you do, every single tool in the communication toolbox is very powerful. Now, there are some specific techniques that Glenn and I have learned over the years that have been very powerful for us, and we love them because if you master them, so to speak, or continue to try and master them, they're not just one tool that you use at one time in one strategy. They are concepts that have gross application. Glenn, what is your favorite, let's just say, what is one of your favorite communication strategies that comes to mind?
It's hard because it's the right tool for the right job, right? But one of the big ones that came to me more naturally, and I was doing a little bit before someone put a name on it, and when someone put a name to it, it made all of the difference for me, was being vulnerable and being honest with my clients about where I was. And I think a lot of times when we go into consult or we're working with new people and new clients, we all can get a little self-conscious or a little worried about how we're being perceived. How are the other people looking at me? How am I navigating this professional relationship so far? I mean, it's only been 10 minutes. And how does this person feel about me? Because we know first impressions are so important. As the old phrase goes, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And what I found was being vulnerable with the people that I'm speaking to, whether it's my clients or friends or family about something that I'm concerned about, went a long way in helping me build rapport and also getting off to the right foot with these clients. And the beautiful thing about honesty and being vulnerable is that it's not really a technique as much as it is just being a human being. You're being honest with these people. And it's not uncommon at the beginning of consults for me to share with people the things that I'm most worried about during that consultation. To give you an example, it used to be money. Hey, so-and-so, I just want to let you know that I sometimes have a hard time talking about money. When we get to that piece, would you work with me on that? When even right now, like I'm stumbling over my words, would you work with me when we get there in case I stumble over my words? Could you help me through that piece? And I've never, ever had anyone say, you know what? I don't appreciate your vulnerability. I won't help you. Get out of here. I'm not interested in the professional relationship. So for me, being honest and being vulnerable goes so far whenever I'm having any sort of conversation with a client or a potential client or a friend or family member that makes me a little nervous.
Honesty is the best policy. And I would say, Greg Mack, we definitely owe that to you for giving us this strategy. It's been a very powerful tool in my toolbox as well. I mean, even on the bad day side of the continuum, we've talked about identity and role in previous episodes, that your identity is your natural self and how you perceive yourself and how other people perceive you naturally. But then you have this role and how you perceive yourself professionally, but then how others perceive you professionally. In some cases, our identity, our real world, our life spills over into our professional world. And we have to be really careful of that because we know that if our identity, our insecurities, even our strengths of our personal life start spilling over into our role, things can get tough. But let's just use a real example, right? Say you had a bad disagreement with someone first thing in the morning. You were in a car accident, your cell phone's not working, and you get to the office and things have just not gone well. You can try to bottle it up, but when you're meeting with someone, people are intuitive. They can tell that you're not in a good mood. Or if they don't know you very well, first impressions is this guy's a jerk. In reality, if you sit down with someone, you go, hey, listen, I got to tell you, I'm really rattled starting off my day. My cell phone is just not working and it's really throwing me off and I can't get in touch with my family. So if I seem a little bit off at the very beginning here, please help me through it. I'm a little nervous about how that may come across. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
And in most cases, people are okay with it. But I love this honesty tool, kind of like you said. Whatever your biggest fear is when you're entering into a situation, whatever it may be, you got to say it. And in reality, I got a story. It's a little different because Glenn, you were talking about in a sales consultation, talking about money. There are not too many clients that I have in my world that come and go. And in reality, if I have someone that comes and goes more than a few times, we usually have an upfront conversation. But there's this one gentleman that some of the people here at Strata would know who has had an incredible amount of surgery. He's had 15 different surgeries on his back, and he's fused from T11 all the way down to L5. Now, he's someone that struggles with depression and emotional issues around this, no doubt, because his mobility is crippling. He cannot move very well at all. And he comes and goes once in a time with me. And the very last time he was here, we had a very upfront conversation about it, where I said, hey, listen, my biggest fear is that we're going to get to a certain point in this working relationship. Your pain isn't going to change as much as you're hoping, and we're going to be making some great progress on the function front. But since your pain isn't changing, you're going to leave and you're going to go back to the surgery route and get injections like we've seen the 3 previous times. If we get to that point, what should we do? And he said very adamantly, no worries. I'm here for the function. I want to stay strong. I don't want to be dependent on anybody else. So I said, okay, great. When we get there, we'll talk to you about it. So 12 weeks into the relationship, we're making great progress. And guess what happens? He starts getting stronger, but his pains don't change. And he finds a doctor who says, hey, for a few bucks, I can give you an injection that'll help. And he goes down that route. And right before he left, I said, client, I'm terrified I'm never going to see you again. Every time we get to one of these points and you say you're going to come back, you don't come back. And guess what? He didn't come back. And it's really, really disappointing. But I was able to be honest and not pushy with him and just say, I'm nervous about this, and try to relate it back to his progress. Honesty is the best policy.
Another great thing about being honest, and I think this is something that comes up at least for a lot of young trainers in the professional relationship, is the mysticism around what is this person thinking. I know even now, as a seasoned professional, 10 years, Brandon, I know you've got over 15, maybe even 20 at this point. It can be a little weird if there's something between you and the client and you're not sure what it is, but nobody really wants to address it. And I cannot tell you, back when I used to sell packages, you would be 10 sessions in to 40 sessions, and both you and the client feel like this isn't working out, but they bought all these sessions. Nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room, whatever that is, and it feels icky. To be vulnerable, to have these conversations, and to detonate these potential bombs before they blow up by removing the mystification, just by saying, hey, something feels weird. Can we talk about it? Goes such a long way in improving the professional relationship. And you might see some of these people leave your schedule. That's fine. But you won't have those kind of days where you've got 8 hours and you're like, I love this client. I love working with this person. I love working with this person. And then you get the client number 4 or 5 and you're like, and that's all you think about for the rest of the day. It really makes the work that you do improving people's health and wellness just not as exciting and enjoyable. And I'm sorry about that noise, everybody.
Glenn, I really appreciate where you're coming from with being honest with a client relationship. It really makes me feel like I can relate to you as a professional. Are there any other communication strategies that you'd like to talk about?
Well, while we're at it. No. Brandon, what's next on your list? What do you got for us?
So stroke, repeat, reverse, or stroke, reverse, nurture. I've heard it in 2 different ways, and it's probably one of my favorite ones. Mm-hmm. It's a very simple way to acknowledge what someone said, stroke, nurture them and make them feel heard, and transactional analysis, though, regardless, in kind of a motherly way, although you don't need to necessarily be a mother to nurture someone, and then reverse and ask another question like I just did with Glenn. It's really powerful because, this notion that questions are the answer, and you can continue a conversation and make it all about the individual that's there in front of you, is very powerful. I've seen this before where I've been around with client-wise, some high-level executive clients, and I'd always find they've seemed really friendly. Because I'd ask them, hey, how are you doing? They go, hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How are you doing? And they'd always deflect it back to me, which made me feel really good because I like to, like all of you, like to talk about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of stroke reverse nurture or stroke repeat reverse, as Sandler says, is another great way to acknowledge what someone says, repeat it or nurture it to make them feel good, and then deflect it back to them to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and I mean, at least for me, this was huge when it came to consultations, right? And we talk about consultations, it is a part of the sales process. I know sales kind of gets a bad rep sometimes, but the way we do things here at Strata, Internal Performance and Fitness Pro Mentors, we do it in a way that everyone's got to win. Everyone's got to win. And if you really want to know, hey, can I help this person? Is my service for them? Is it going to work? Do they have the money to invest in this? Do they have the time to invest in this? Are they the kind of person I want to work with? You have to be able to ask those questions. And if you're always talking about yourself or you're getting caught responding to all their questions, you never really get the necessary information you need to find out, is this person going to be a good fit and should we move forward with the professional relationship?
Glenn, I really like your perspective around questions. It makes me really question how I think about questions. When you're talking about information that you're trying to get from people to figure out if it's a good idea to move forward or not, what kind of pieces of information are you interested in?
Brandon, I really appreciate the compliment, and I love what you're saying. Can you be a little bit more precise? I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Could you help me out here?
Well, my biggest fear is we're going nowhere with this conversation. So I think we should button this up and move on to the next part.
But I will say, this is actually a game that Brandon and I have played before and that we play with each other. It's the stroke reverse nurture game where we see if we can go back and forth and keep trying to stroke reverse nurture each other to pass the buck back and forth, but really just to improve working on this technique.
I really enjoy it, and I do recommend in the communication module we do in the Fitness Pro Mentors program, I actually recommend it as a game because if you can, and you know, when there's two people who've taken it and practiced stroke reverse nurturing, it's a lot easier. But what a really interesting game is if you can work on stroking, reversing, and nurturing and try to continue the conversation with someone that doesn't really know what they're doing, can you ask questions and employ that technique in a way that the person you're talking to really can't tell? And it's actually really tough. Because I find the thing that's the weirdest part is not actually the technique of doing it seamlessly. It's actually that you feel like the person who's practicing it, like you're going to get caught. And in reality, they're going to bust me, right? They're not going to catch you. And if you do it really, really choppily and you're like, well, Glenn, thank you for your great question, right, and you make it all mechanical, then you're going to get busted. But in reality, you can make it really, really smooth, and you don't have to overthink the questions because you can just repurpose what the individual said.
It's almost like you're saying if you practice a skill, you get better at it, Brandon.
That's right, Glenn. I am saying if you work on a skill, you're going to get better at it. And I appreciate you saying that. I mean, what kind of skills do you think would be great to work on to get better at the stroke reverse nurture game?
Communication. So, I mean, another technique kind of leading away from this, and this is something that Brandon has really brought to light to me over the past year, and that is the hierarchy of how we ought to aim our communication at people. So a lot of times our default, and we kind of talked about this in part one, but we'll talk about it as a technique here. Our default is to want to text people. It's easy, it's quick. We don't have to worry about our emotions as much or their emotions as much. They're just words. If we get rejected over text message by a client or by somebody, it hurts less, right? Our identity takes less of a hit, however you want to say it. When we are looking at how we want to communicate with people in our world, it is almost always best to do it as much as you can face-to-face, especially about sensitive issues. If I'm having an issue with a client, like we talked about before, that elephant in the room, I'm not going to do it over text message. So much is lost because only 7% of our communication is via text message, 38% is tonality, 55%, a whopping majority is by body language, and you just can't communicate that over text no matter how many emojis that you use. One of the techniques that we have here is if you can communicate with the person face-to-face, communicate with them face-to-face. If face-to-face just isn't possible and is very urgent, try doing it over a voice note or over phone like a Zoom. If you can't do that, then by all means resort to a text message or an email, but know that your communications get watered down every step of the way. Always try to aim for that face-to-face, especially if it's going to be about something that's a little bit more sensitive and you think might be more emotional. Almost certainly, as a golden rule, if you're worried about how something might be taken by somebody, you should always default to face-to-face. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I think any conflict that you're trying to resolve through text message is an absolute terrible, terrible idea. And I have for many, many, many years, I will absolutely stay away from any email, text message conflicts. If I ever get the tone from a client or a friend or a family member that something's not right through text message, you pick up the phone, send a voice memo, call them, or wait till you see them in person. And I know that sounds super simple, but it is one of the simplest and most powerful strategies that you can employ. I mean, I'm sure many of you have been in an altercation of some sort through text message written form. And you know that if that person were in front of you, the literal words that you used on the text message would have never come out of your thumbs or that individual's thumbs. And that's because, honestly, saying those kind of things in person is terrifying. But there's this lower barrier of entry when you're just text messaging. It's so easy to just type it and let it go, right? Don't be scared of communicating, because honestly, getting good at this stuff is a massive pillar in your business and in your technical world. Because if you can't get at communicating face-to-face, how dare you even think about charging a premium rate for a face-to-face service?
Yeah, it just doesn't work. I mean, I have nothing else really to add to what Brandon said. You ought to be handling anything sensitive face-to-face as much and as often as you can. Some things you try calling, you can't get through. You try leaving a voice memo, nothing's being responded to. Then perhaps try an email so you get through another layer of communication and make sure at least you're trying to communicate with this human being that you want to get in touch with. But when you can, really, you got to make it face-to-face.
So one of the other things that I'm a big fan of, that I've learned more and more about as the years have gone on, and I was aware of it when I was a younger person, but seeing how it fits into my business really blew my mind, is understanding that there are different types of learners, of people in front of you. People who are more visual learners, people who are more kinetic learners, and people who are more auditory learners. And why I absolutely love this, my screen just went off. Hopefully that's not a problem.
We're going to see.
And we're still going. Screen turned off. If you're watching this, we're doing good. So pardon me, screensaver, just keep moving the mouse.
Yes.
So there's different types of learners, auditory, visual, and kinetic learners. And for me, this was a really powerful thing to learn, because the more I could get creative with describing an exercise or an anatomical process to an individual, to someone who's more visual, someone who's more kinetic, and someone who's more auditory, allowed me to take advanced concepts or teaching an exercise and help me hit home with the individual faster. I think one of the characteristics of a high-level trainer is not only better exercises, but being able to convey the message of what you're trying to do with the exercise and the goal of that exercise faster and more seamlessly. And so auditory learners are people who are a bit more detail-oriented, and they want every single word, and very likely they may even want you to type out every single word so they can review it later. Visual learners are people who want to see, and they want to see what's going on, just like you guys may be here while you're watching this, right? People who want to see every detail, and they're going to watch, they're going to look at the paper, they're going to watch everything. And then kinetic learners are people who need to feel it and experience it. And this is the type of person that when you're doing an exercise, they're going to jump in there and they're going to start doing the squat right beside you so they can feel it. Or if you're showing them a mobility profile or something like that, they're going to get their eyes right on top of it and they're going to touch the lines and stuff like that. Visual, auditory, and kinetic learners. It's an extremely simple idea, but the more comfortable you can get with teaching the same idea to different types of learners and different demographics of people, the ultimate freedom you have in communicating.
I mean, this is part of the reason why teachers are amazing what they do, because they find ways to teach singular concepts to a wide variety of learners all at the same time by either using visual aids, choosing their words carefully, all those different methodologies and techniques that Brandon just spoke about.
I love it. I love it. So what do you got, Glenn? What's one of your favorite other communication strategies?
Well, one of my favorite other communication strategies can be said in many different ways. And you've already alluded to it, actually touched upon it already. And that is, you can think in science, but speak to where people are at. Now, I won't go into that facet because you already touched upon it, but I'm a big believer in analogies. And I think practicing as many different analogies as you can to get key concepts over to your clients is of the utmost importance. I personally spend a little bit of time throughout my week, whether I'm doing drives to clients' houses, maybe not right now per se, but when I'm going to the grocery store, whatever that might be, I'm out there practicing and thinking of different analogies to explain concepts to people. Even things like fat loss. I have this idea where I would explain to people, like, imagine the amount of body fat on your body is a sink. And if you wanted to empty out that sink, what would you do? You'd open the plug, all the water would drain out. If you want to fill it up, you'd plug that sink, you'd turn that tap on, and all the water would come in, right? Well, if you want to lose some body fat, you got to open that plug. You got to burn some energy. Maybe it looks like eating less or exercising more, whatever that is to you. But in the same regard, you've got that tap running, or that might be the calories that you're ingesting in a day. And if you've got that sink plug open just a little bit, but the tap's turned on full, all that water's pouring in, all that energy's coming in, all those calories are coming in, you're probably going to end up adding body fat. So if you're really interested in this losing body fat goal because you know it's going to help your joints and feel good, what we want to do is find some strategies to help you turn down that sink knob a little bit. Maybe there's less water coming in, less energy coming in, and open that plug up a little bit more, whether it's making different nutritional choices or maybe exercising a little bit more to help you lose some of that body fat so it's a little bit less pressure on your joints, right? This is something that most people understand because everybody at some point in their time has used a sink. It's commonplace, right? I used to have all these other analogies which were a little bit out there and crazy, and Brandon's like, hey, Glenn, these analogies might not work so well, like the suntan versus sunburn. You're like, that might not be applicable to everybody. You told me about the callus analogy we're talking about. I'm going off on other tangents here. The important thing to do is if there's important concepts that you want to communicate to people in your world who might be potential clients or our clients, finding a way to communicate to them through analogies is going to be of the utmost importance.
I think analogies are fantastic. I use a lot of them. One of my favorite ones is talking about how osteoarthritis happens. Not so much if the genetic side of it, but so much more like how does the idea of asymmetrical mechanical wear show up in someone's body. And when I'm doing this consultation, I have that question that come up a lot because people will have like, well, I've got arthritis like my mom did, but mine's only on my one knee, not both knees. How does that even happen? And so the analogy I love to use is the magician laying on the bed of nails analogy. It's so simple, but if you have two different joint surfaces and you think of it like a magician laying on a bed of nails, and you've got a 100-pound magician laying over 100 nails, right? That seems really complicated and advanced when you're looking at that individual on the bed of nails because he's got all these pointy things into his back, but in reality, the physics of it's not that complicated. You just have 1 pound per nail, which is still impressive, but not crazy. Now, all of a sudden, if that joint is not laying asymmetrically, it's laying a little bit asymmetrically and it's putting more wear on one side over the other, if that 100-pound magician was laying only on 10 nails, gosh, you could imagine that'd be super dangerous. I want to see the magician that can lay on 1 nail. Now, in reality, osteoarthritis is not that extreme of a transition where you go from 100 magician to 100 nails. It's more like 100-pound magician, 90 nails, right? So it's smaller shifts, but over time, if you put the same amount of stress through that system, mechanical wear, you're going to have just a little bit more wear where those 90 nails are, which over time can lead into some insidious stuff. So something like that, when we've got little models in front of us, like Glenn's analogy, those are incredibly simple ways to really hit home in the communication mark. I love it.
I'm right there with you. And I think a great idea for a podcast, maybe we'll do it down the road, is our favorite analogies for health and wellness. Because I think you and I both, off the top of my head, probably have at least 10 or 15 that we use on a semi-regular basis that other people out there in exercise land might enjoy hearing or use with their clients as well.
Absolutely. And hey, if you're listening to this episode either live or in the recording later, and you've got some particular episodes that you want Glenn and I to cover, please send us a message. Join the Fitness Pro Mentors Facebook group. It's free. Lots of free information in there. And please send us a message, type of content, a little bit of content, and let us know exactly what you want us to talk about because we'll happily talk about it. We've got a lot of crazy things. But Glenn, I got one more thing on my mind. Are you okay if I move on to the next part?
I would love it if you move on to the next part, Brett.
So
Thank you for asking.
The next part is permission theory. And honestly, it's super simple, but asking for permission to do another transaction or another ritual in that conversation thing. So it's just as simple as you heard me with Glenn. If you're in a sales consultation, you say, hey, Glenn, thanks so much for telling everything about going on with your body. Is it okay if we talk about money now? Mm-hmm. Right? If you have that same awkward conversation that Glenn was talking about with his client, where he's got someone that's really stressing him out and he doesn't really know how to approach that conversation. He goes, hey, client, there's something kind of awkward I'd love to talk to you about. Is it okay if we talk about something a little different than exercise for a minute? Right? Just asking a question if you can skip a beat and move on to a different section. Permission theory is a very simple way to ask permission before you move into the next piece. And it really helps the client know you, like you, and trust you even more. Because if they're uncomfortable talking about it, you've given them an out by asking.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times permission theory has, I want to say the word is saved, but it feels like it saved me in my life because difficult conversations become that much easier when you ask for permission. Imagine a scenario, and we've all probably had them, where somebody had an issue with you and they came right up to you and they said, hey, I got to talk to you about something. You and I are going to hash this out right now. Instinctively, your little lizard brain is like, I either have to run away from this person or I have to fight this person. What am I going to do? Versus somebody come up to you and saying, hey, listen, I've had this issue. I don't know how to talk to you about it. It makes me a little bit nervous. I feel a little vulnerable even just approaching with it. Do you think you'd work with me through this and we can help understand each other? Instantaneously, totally changes the conversation. Part of that reason is because people like to save other people. That's part of permission theory, right? People like to save other people. People like to be the hero. People like to help other people. It makes them feel good. So by you asking for permission, it's like almost like you're reaching out your hand saying, please help me with this thing. And the other person is saying, yes, I will help you. And it makes them feel good.
I love it. I love it, Glenn. Are there any other communication strategies at the top of your mind that you want to talk about today? Because I think we've covered a lot.
There is one more, but I'm not going to talk about it. You're going to talk about it. And that's because I actually learned this from you. And that is the art of storytelling. Now, I could talk about it a little bit, but to be honest with you, and I'm not trying to, this is not me trying to be vulnerable or ask for permission or anything. This is just my honest to goodness feelings. Brandon is a pretty fantastic storyteller. If you've seen any of the content on Fitness Pro Mentors, you probably have recognized that right away. Your ability to tell stories is fantastic because you can really connect with people. Could you share with people a little bit about how you think about storytelling?
Honestly, well, thank you so much for asking. Honestly, my mentor, Peter Chason, who was Toronto's he was Toronto and everybody's RTS instructor. He was I was a huge fan of his. And he was not someone who did blog posts, but I remember he did this one blog post 12 years ago, and I think it was called The Art of the Story. And it was this incredible thing. There's one thing that Peter was amazing at. He was an amazing mechanist, but he told stories in such a way that really pulled you in. You were interested in the story. He made you laugh. And then all the stories had some sort of resolution and lesson in it that you could also laugh and remember, like the Syracuse toilet story, right? Like, I mean, just saying that, it sounds hilarious for me to say that, but I will never forget the story about the Syracuse toilet, where he was driving through Syracuse and he saw this toilet. And the toilet, he wanted to go to the bathroom, but he saw that the toilet was off and the water was off. And he goes, well, I'm a mechanical guy. I know what I can do here. And so he'd go over and he'd turn the water on. As soon as he turned the water on, he got covered in piss water and he did not like it. And so what did he learn? Not to mess with things that he doesn't understand, right? So simple story like that just kind of gives you some framing of when I'm doing an exercise with Glenn and I go, oh, I think I know what's going on here, but do you really know what's going on? And so the idea of storytelling for me, I think, is one of the most powerful things. In fact, everyone who joins our mentorship program and, tidbit, I make everybody record themselves telling their story. And I love stories because if you watch any movie, you get this idea of that there's some sort of introduction to a character or a thing. And the character could be a person or it could be a thing like a muscle or a bone. And when you think about where that fits into a story, right, like Luke Skywalker's cruising around, and then all of a sudden there's some form of antagonist or pain or problem or villain that perturbs his journey of becoming a hero or whatever it may be. And so you have this awesome introduction. You have this problem or this villainous thing that you think you can resolve. You try to fix it, but then all of a sudden the journey is interrupted again. And at the end, there's some sort of amazing resolution that happens, the eureka moment that allows the hero to figure out what's going on and go on to the next step. But then after that amazing eureka moment, there's always another thing. And so I love this because when you think about telling stories about the body with a client, I mean, the idea of us as personal trainers with our clients is where I love talking about who we work with. Because here at Strata, we work with a lot of people who are struggling with joint pains and problems, and specifically people over the age of 65. And so most of these people, if they've got aches and pains, right, they have a story that you've heard before, where they've tried to resolve the problem. They've hired chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage therapists, super duper therapists, like all these different things, and people help them, but then they have the same trope that you've heard about over and over again. They tried something, it felt better, and it came back. And that story is this loop that consistently happens, and people just figure that's the way it is to get better, is you have a problem, you get it fixed, and then it comes back. And so that becomes a part of our story where we see that there's this loop, and if we can interrupt that story and talk about, hey, if you identify through massage which muscles, when you stimulate, either loosen or tighten up, they make a change on the body, that's amazing. Now we can take those same muscle groups and identify specifically which ones and progress that to resistance exercise to create some adaptations to make some long-term changes. But we have to continue to be responsible as we look at your body because you are in this position where you're getting a bit older. And so even if we can get you super strong and quote unquote button up some of these problems now, we have to look at where this is going and where you're going. And this is where exercise fits in long term. And so we solve 3 problems with what we do here. We help people immediately with something they're unhappy about so they can get back to doing what they love. We create a long-term strategy so it conditions their body so they stay that way. And then we talk about how staying that way is equally as important as getting buttoned up by looking at it as a lifelong participation with exercise. And I love that. And so, I mean, this is kind of a tangent from storytelling, but that's the idea, is that you have to look at when you're creating a product or a service, how do you solve something immediately? How do you solve quote unquote the secondary problem that comes from that? And then how do you make sure the long-term implications of the thing that you're working on are resolved indefinitely? And the body, unlike a machine, things don't change in our body unless you have a part removed and you put a new piece in, which is hard to do. So I think storytelling is very, very powerful, very powerful.
And so what you'll notice is that all these different strategies and all these different techniques, they're not things that you use at certain times, but a lot of them are ever present in the communication every day. I think at least once a day I'm asking for, not even once a day, I'm asking for permission with clients probably every session. Hey, Dorian, that was a really great set. Are you okay if we talk about how that felt for you? Right? Or, hey, that was a really great set. How'd that feel? Oh, Glenn, that didn't feel too good. It felt better yesterday. Why do you think that is? Dorian, that's a great question. I appreciate you're giving it some thought. What do you think happened in the past 24 to 48 hours that might have caused that? There are all these different ways that we can filter and use these techniques and strategies with our clients every day. That's why it's important to know them and practice them, because they become invaluable tools to help the people we work with, and also to help you make more money and live the life that you want as a fitness professional.
On that note, I mean, I've said this multiple times in this group, so if you've heard me say this, I'm sorry. And if you haven't, enjoy and please use it. Every person I've ever had a conversation with as to where they're struggling within their business, most people have a hard time getting people in the door, and they've invested into some sort of sales process and assessment process. Amazing. By the way, this Friday, if you're watching this live, I'm doing a mini interview with Greg Mack. We're going to talk about some really cool things. But if you want more information, Glenn and I have interviewed him twice? No, just once. Twice? One time. And there's a lot of great information in there. So I'm going to be poking at Greg Mack, and he's got an amazing sales and intake process. But coming back to marketing, if you're confused about marketing and what you should do to help get people in the door, there is one thing that you can do that is so easy. Glenn's done it, and we've done it. Speaking of Dorian, look at Glenn's personal Instagram page, and you will see this gentleman named Dorian, who is one of Glenn's clients. Now, regardless of what his actual story is, the individual that's on the screen, that person's look and the way they carry themselves, that's already a part of the story. And then you hear them say things like, I was struggling with this and I was hurting here, and this guy came along named Glenn and he really listened to me and he really heard me, and through the stuff he did, it resolved all this stuff. Those are the most powerful stories. Your client champion videos are the best stories, because we can sit here and say, here's Dorian's story. Or Dorian could be here and say, here's my story, right? Diane could be here and she says, here's my story. When they tell their real story, it doesn't matter if you call yourself a biomotor, configurationalist, biomechanics, internal performance, whatever. It doesn't matter. If they say he's a stretch person and you don't use stretches, but they describe that the things that you do that they call stretches made you feel better for their entire life up to this point, gosh, that's amazing. I love champion stories. Free marketing advice. Get as many people you can to talk on camera about their story, because even if they say something that's different than how you think about your business, they're going to say a lot by just being themselves.
May I add one other thing onto that one? It might not be necessarily a communication strategy, but something to think about is you don't want to paint on other people's picture. If somebody has a way of doing things or a way of articulating things, it's not going to help you to say, hey, you're not using that terminology right. Brandon and I both have clients that use the term stretch to define muscular contractions, right? We say, hey, can you move your arm up here? They feel, oh, I have a stretching sensation in my chest, right? And I know that stretching sensation is a muscle contracting, just to let them know, hey, we're getting close to our end range of motion. Perhaps don't go much farther. But I don't stop the client and say, oh, I'm sorry, you are wrong. That's not a stretch, it's this. I say, great, thanks for that information. Then later on, I might educate as to what that sensation might be. But I'm not going to go out of my way to tell the client they're wrong about something. I might ask them to consider a different perspective, but I'm not going to say you are wrong, because wrong making, just like the opposite of being vulnerable to a client. If you're going to make somebody wrong, even if it's with good intention, that doesn't feel good, right? You want to, if anything, you want to make it so that the client is saving you. And we're not asking you to be fake or like to set up fake saves or anything like that, but you just have to be mindful about how you're communicating with people so that you're not painting on their picture, so to speak. I guess maybe I didn't say this, but painting on their picture refers to them having an idea of what the world looks like, their picture, and then you going and drawing on it being like, actually, you're wrong. Actually, this isn't correct. Actually, da-da-da-da. If you've ever met a know-it-all who's constantly correcting people, you know exactly what that feeling or sensation is like. You're explaining something to somebody, and they're multiple times telling you over and over again, actually, that's not correct. Actually, technically, it's this. Actually, this is that. And you're like, what is this Jack A saying, right? So anyways, what you said there just reminded me of that anecdote and that other strategy, if you want to call that, which is don't paint on people's pictures.
I don't think that's what you meant at all. Let me just correct you and fix that really quickly. That was in... Anyway, so honestly, at the end of the day, communication is a very powerful tool. And there are even more things that are coming to my mind as we're getting to the end of this episode. But just practice being present when you're talking to someone and listen to what people say. And if you did any of these strategies and you just did the stroke reverse nurture, just that alone starts to get you more information. When someone asks you a question, respond with another question to get more information. Hey, Glenn, should I be feeling that here? And you go, that's a great question. Where are you feeling that? Now, all of a sudden, you've asked them a question, you can get more information, and the more information you have, the better decisions that you can make. So if you guys are watching this live or you've never heard the episode before, Glenn and I like to do this thing called the pick of the week, where we each pick one thing, one person, one variable in our life that is different, that's influencing us in a positive way. Mr. Glenn Owen, what is your pick of the week?
So I was actually telling you about this before the podcast. Brandon and I have been experimenting with different softwares on our computers to create video content. Brandon uses something called the Ecamm Live as an interface tool to create a lot of the content that he's been doing for Fitness Pro Mentors. I've been using one that is more Windows friendly. Ecamm Live is specifically for Mac. And if you're a Mac user, Brandon showed it to me. It's fantastic. It seems pretty simple to use. And we're using it right now. I was trying to find one for Windows, and there are a ton of different ones. I spent an hour researching, and I tried a couple. And the one that worked the best for me, and I loved it, was one that's actually open source. And you get actually a lot with the basic version, and that is Streamlabs OBS. Streamlabs OBS.
Oh, yeah, OBS.
Yep, it's very, very good. I watched an 18-minute YouTube video on how to use it. I got all the information that I needed. It's super cool. You can create different layers. You can add all your video capture that you want, like how we're using this beautiful Canon right now, 6D Mark II. I can add my own microphones that I want. I can change different audio levels. I actually filmed a video yesterday of me responding to what a cardiologist said about getting to exercise for your heart. And it was super simple to set up the scene that I wanted. I really, really liked it as a simple point and click tool. I think for a lot of people who are watching the Fitness Pro Mentors content, a lot of this stuff, if they want to get into it, can feel overwhelming, right? I mean, it only feels that way because you might not understand some of the processes and there's a lot to learn, but really there's just some stuff to learn and there's a bit of a learning curve. For me, I didn't want to have to spend hours learning a new piece of software on top of all the other stuff I'm doing to grow my business right now. And the fact that I could learn this software in under an hour and already make a wonderfully impactful video went a long way. Brandon, my pick of the week is Streamlabs OBS. If you're looking for an interface to go live with people in your world or that you want to reach, but also just to create some cool video content and interface all the stuff that you want.
Can I go now?
It's your turn.
Thank you.
I don't know, Brandon. Can you?
That's a great question. So my pick of the week is creating an inspirational environment. And so one thing that I'm a huge fan of is wherever you are working, wherever you are doing a specific ritual, whether it be family, whether it be work, whether it be exercising. Create an environment that inspires you and gets you excited, but also sets up barriers from the other things. Right now, as you guys can tell, this is a brand new backdrop for the Minds on Muscle podcast I'm really excited about. And these small changes where we've got the Edison light bulbs and the barn wood back and all this really gets me inspired to create more. If I've got a nice looking visual and it looks professional and sharp, and I didn't have to buy any one thing, all I had to do is reorganize the room a little bit to get more out of the space. That gets me fired up. And so we did an episode with Curtis Clay on the Minds on Muscles a while ago about branding and also about culture. And so I love this. Like, even when I'm up here alone, this space inspires me. So what I would recommend is, if you ever struggle with exercise, creativity, workflow, whatever it is, make sure you have a designated space where you can create all the pillars of things that you need to have full autonomy and do the things that you love. I think it's huge.
I think so too, Brandon. This has been a fantastic episode. I really like doing this. This is the first one that we did live. I really enjoyed it. If you're loving this content and you're a fitness professional or exercise professional and you feel like your business needs a little bit of help, Brandon and I do offer complimentary consultation calls. We sit down and talk with you 45 minutes. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer to find out all about you and your business. You might even catch us using some of the techniques we talked about in this podcast. And then we'll chat with you and help you maybe make some recommendations about what you could do to improve your business. And if you want to and you're open to it, share a little bit about the Fitness Pro Mentors course.
You won't catch us using the techniques. We're too smooth. No, but everyone, thank you so much for checking it out. I mean, we're really excited about producing content that helps you take your business to the absolute next level. Glenn and I, we work out of a brick and mortar facility in Newmarket, Ontario called Strata Internal Performance. At the moment, we are closed because of Ontario's regulations. But when we're open up, any of you, if you're in the area and you want to check out the spot and see how we work, check out the Fitness Pro Mentor Studio, whatever you want, you are welcome when the province says that you're welcome. If you enjoyed this episode, we're going live today, first time, which is exciting, but it's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, it's on everywhere you can find podcasts. If you want to do us a huge favor so more people can check us out, please give us a 5-star rating, share this episode, tell more people, and if you think you know any trainers that could benefit from this information, we will be going live most of the time in this Facebook group when Glenn and I are doing this solo. Next 2 weeks, we got some superstar interviews, which we won't be going live for, but we promise they're going to be worth it.
Yeah, you're not going to want to miss them. They're both people that have had a huge impact and a huge influence on our careers, both from a technical end and a communication end and a business growth end and a thought process end. I'm very excited for it. I won't belabor the point any further. Everybody, my name is Glenn.
And I'm Brandon.
And this has been another delicious edition of the Minds on Muscle podcast.
Talk to you soon.
Ciao.